welcome back to my channel. My name is James. I am the world's worst web developer, and today I'm going to be talking about CSS Grid. Before you close the video, this is not a full-blown Grid tutorial. Grid is a very complex system for creating layouts, and you can do all sorts of crazy things with Grid. I'm not going to show you all those crazy things. A full Grid tutorial would be a series of videos. This is just a pretty simple video that's going to show you how to create a very basic responsive 4-column grid that changes to 3 columns, 2 columns, 1 column as the screen size changes. I think that's what like 90% of people are doing when they use Grid. Anyways, so I want to show you how to do that. You can do it with Flex. I actually think it's more difficult to do with Flex. Usually Flex is the quick, simple method, but in this case, I think it's actually easier to just use Grid, I think you'll see why. So, and then after that, I'm going to show you how to use container queries instead of using media queries. And if you're not sure what the difference is there, I will be explaining that when I get to that point. So let's go ahead and jump right in, shall we? Let me delete all this stuff. We're not going to cheat. I already did this. I already did all of this, and I'm not going to cheat and just reuse it. We're going to start over. So let me delete some of this stuff. All right, blank slate. Let's go. Here's our blank page. Now I'm using Etch. Etch is a WordPress development environment. You don't have to use it, of course. This is just regular CSS. This is just a CSS lesson. So you could be using VS Code, or you could create a code pen, or whatever you want to do. But I'm using Etch. So I'm going to add a section. In Etch, sections come with containers, which is fine by me. I'll go ahead and leave that. I'm going to name this a grid lesson, whatever. Inside the container, I'm going to add, let's see, a div, and I'm going to call this grid. Inside that, I'm going to add a div, and I'm going to call it card. Inside that, let's just add heading, text, and a link. Not going to be doing anything crazy here. Okay. What else do we need? Anything else? Not at the moment. So let's go ahead and give all these elements classes. You can give classes to your elements however you would like. I prefer to use them, which is what I just did. And now that I've done that, I'm going to duplicate this card a few times. So now we have 4 different cards. And then I am just going to add a little bit of styling to this card. This is not what the lesson is about, but I just need to add a little bit of styling so I don't go crazy. Let's say add a little padding. There we go. Just to make them actually, look like cards. Okay, so as you can see, what we have is, 4 cards stacked on top of each other. That's not what we want. We're going for a nice responsive 4-column grid. And it's actually incredibly easy to do that. So we're going to go to the container that's containing all of these, the wrapper we'll call it, that's wrapping around all these cards. We're going to give it a display of grid. And we're going to say grid template columns repeat for 1FR. Template columns repeat. Oops. There we go. Boom. We got ourselves a 4-column grid, and I'm going to say gap in pixels. Problem with this is that it's not yet responsive, right? So if we go look at the front end and we shrink our screen down, we get these little skinny little columns, and that's not what we're looking for. When we get to a certain width, we would like it to drop down to 3 columns, and then 2 columns, and then 1 column. So how do we do that? Well, that's also pretty easy. And to make sure I don't screw up, I'm just going to copy and paste some stuff. if I can find it. Here we go. All right, so on our grid div, we're just gonna add some media queries. And let's make sure we'll use proper nesting. Okay. Now, this should, yep, look at that. When we get to, I believe it's 1024 pixels is what we set, it drops to 3 columns. And then I think 768, it goes to 2 columns. And we can't get small enough in Chrome without using the inspect tool. Let's use the inspect tool and watch it go down to 1 column. Boom, look at that. That was very easy. We have ourselves a responsive grid, and look, it even translates the gap to the bottom. So we have the same exact space between these horizontal elements as we do between the vertical elements. I don't think Flex does that. I could be wrong. But anywho, I mean, so that's it, right? We just created a very quickly created a 4-column grid that is perfectly responsive. It was very easy. This is all we had to do, really. This is not a lot of CSS. You can tweak these numbers, of course, to whatever you want. These are just pretty typical breakpoints. But we're going to take this one little step further. Instead of using media queries, we're going to use something called container queries. And the difference is a media query is saying, it's looking at the width of your entire screen, and it's saying if the width of our entire screen drops below 1024 pixels, then go to 3 columns. If it drops below 768, go to 2 columns. And that works if you're working with the full width of the screen here. Okay, but what if you're not? What if there's another element over here taking up a whole bunch of screen real estate? That's going to kind of screw up your media queries, and I'll show you what I mean. We're just going to add a simple sidebar in here. So in order to do that, I'm going to add a flex div first. And inside the flex div, I'm going to add a div, and I'm just going to call this grid wrapper. So I'm going to throw my grid in there. Okay. And then we're going to add a div, and I'm going to call this sidebar. All right, and let's go ahead and throw some text in there just for fun. Let's say lorem times, I don't know, 6. Okay. And we got to do some classes. Let's see, can I redo the BEM thing? Will it? Yeah, awesome. Okay, so our flex div is already display flex, but etch makes it column by default, so I'm going to say flex direction row because I want the sidebar over there. And the sidebar, I'm going to give it a specific width of 400 pixels. And then the grid wrapper, I'm just going to say flex 1, so it will shrink or grow to fit the space. And then just for my own sanity, we'll give a little gap. So here's what we have. We have a sidebar over here taking up a bunch of space. And so now, because we based our columns on the full width of the screen, what's going to happen is if we shrink this down, our columns are going to get all skinny and squishy. Why? Because it's looking at the full width of the screen and saying, hey, the full width of the screen still hasn't hit 1024 pixels yet, so we're going to stay 4 columns. And then finally, when you get to 1024, it shrinks down to 3 columns. So what we want to do is, instead of looking at the full width of the screen to determine when to swap out these columns, we want to look at the width of the container that the columns are actually in, because that's really what matters. When the container that these cards are in shrinks down to this size, then we want to change the number of columns. So let's do that. And it's very, very simple, to be honest. There's a couple things that is required. So in order for this to work, the grid div has to be inside another div. That's why I added this grid wrapper, because this grid wrapper is what we're going to be looking at. Instead of looking at the full width of the screen, we're going to look at the width of this grid wrapper. So for this to work, we do need to just say container type inline size on the grid wrapper. And then on the grid, we're just going to take out these media queries and we're going to replace them with some container queries. Just like that. Save. And let's go take a look. Now you can see it's already down to 3 columns because that's just the width of our screen. I could probably force it to 4 columns if I make it big enough. Maybe not. Oh, you know what? First of all, let's oh, you know what? The container's never actually, the container's not growing with this, with the screen size. Dummy. I don't know why I thought that would happen. So it's never going to go to 4 columns because this the wrapper that it's in is never reaching 1024 pixels. So it doesn't matter how big I make the screen, the container that these cards are in is not growing, so it's never going to go to 4 columns. But if we shrink it, we get past 768, it goes down to 2 columns. And if we keep going, we'll get 1 column. And you notice they're never getting all skinny and scrunched up because it's not waiting for the entire width of the screen to hit 1024 pixels, 768, 480. It's just waiting for the container that the cards are actually in to hit those widths. And the reason this is important, you might be thinking, well, I could just have adjusted my media queries to, you know, change the columns at a different screen size instead of 1024. And yes, you could do that. But what if this over here is dynamic, meaning it might be 400 pixels, it might be 200 pixels, it might be 600 pixels. Let's take a look at what happens if we dynamically change the width of this sidebar. Let's say instead of 400 pixels, it's only 100 pixels. Oh, look at that. Now we got 4 columns because the container that these cards are in was able to stretch out to 1024 pixels, so now it got 4 columns. We bump this back up to 400, we get 3 columns. We go 600, 2 columns. You can see it's never doing that scrunchy thing that it was doing before. If you were still using regular media queries, this would not look good because even though this section is growing to take up all this space, the whole screen width hasn't changed yet, which means these columns are still going to be 4 columns. So they're going to be all skinny and scrunched up. So that's why container queries are better. And it's not any more work. It's just instead of media queries, we added container queries. I mean, it's the same amount of work. It's almost the same code, really. But it allows you to have more fine-tuned control over the look of your grid. And if the width of this ever changes, it doesn't matter. The columns will adjust responsively based on the width of this. You don't have to think about it. So I would say just use container queries probably always. Maybe someone will disagree with me, but I don't see any disadvantages to using container queries. I only see the advantage that we saw here. So if you're not using container queries, I highly suggest that you start and just jump in and try it, man. Like I said, it's not that hard. It's not that hard. Look at this code. It's basically the same thing as doing media queries. Just remember to give this outer wrapper container type inline size. I don't even know why. That's just what the internet said. If we go look at it, yeah, it breaks. So make sure to do that. That's one thing I kept forgetting to do earlier today as I was preparing for this video. So make sure to give the wrapper container type inline size and then container queries instead of media queries, and then you're good. You just became a better web developer by switching to container queries. And if you really want to blow your mind, look up container style queries. Those aren't fully supported yet, so I wouldn't start using them, but you know, look it up. Hit some YouTube videos because that allows you to do some pretty cool stuff too. So anywho, I think that's it for this video, guys. We got to see a very simple grid, and then we got to level it up a little bit with container queries. So hopefully you learned something and enjoyed this video, and I will catch you in the next one.